So the first card I have is Donald Driscoll. Driscoll.
Driscoll. And I am Donald Driscoll.
Good evening. I've reviewed the Marin Municipal Water District rate increases. They present serious issues. Due to limited time, I'm only able to touch on a few key issues. Often the reason for sharp rate increases. Let me try to focus with that. Often the reason for sharp rate increases is a water shortage. Shortages leave water districts with the same fixed costs, but less water to sell. This district's proposed rate hikes are based on a study completed by Corello engineers over a year ago. That study could not anticipate the wet winter we just had. The district reports that reservoirs are currently 98.5% full, not including today's rain. If the Corello report is used to set rates, it will not reflect the current water supply, and the resulting rates will overstate actual costs. There will be dry years, just as there are wet years. That is easy enough to address. Many water districts build in allowances that change rates when there is a drought. There's no need to overcharge customers this year to allow for future fluctuations in rainfall. So why the proposed rate increases? More than half of Marin Water's budget is for personnel. The biggest reason for rate increases is how rapidly the district is increasing compensation. The most recent numbers available are from 2017. You, the board of directors, meet only twice a month, yet the board received approximately $100,000 in benefits in 2017, up 46% from the previous year. The person who was general manager at that time, Krishna Kumar, received total compensation of over $365,000, a 20%, $75,000 increase in just 2 years. The general manager is just one of 28 district personnel that year who received over $200,000 in compensation. In 2017, the district paid more than $1 million in overtime. Overtime was concentrated among supervisors and crew leaders. The Corello report explains that the district has been increasing compensation by 5% a year. At the district's request, Corello based proposed rates on future increases of 5.5% a year. I don't believe that increases in benefits and salary are really going to be limited to 5.5% a year, considering that the general manager succeeded in obtaining a 46% increase in just 2 years. There's hidden money in the Corello report for expenses that do not exist, waiting to be used for hefty increases. The biggest part of the hidden money is reportedly for debt service. The Corello revenue requirement analysis states debt service will rise from $7.4 million to $12.8 million, a $5.4 million increase. Yet if you drill down into the projected expenditures in the same report, you will see there's actually no increase in debt service projected. The $5.4 million increase is not an actual cost. It amounts to a slush fund. Rates that are higher than costs violate Proposition 218, enacted by the voters and now part of the California Constitution. As established by the California Supreme Court and Silicon Valley Taxpayers Association versus Santa Clara County Open Space Authority, if Marin Municipal's water rates are challenged in court, it will have the burden of proving that its rates are in compliance with Proposition 218. I urge the Water Board not to implement unsupported and unreasonable rate increases. Thank you.
Thank you. The intent is to try to respond to questions or comments, and I did catch some of those, and I'll do my best on some of these. I do want to note that, as you saw, the rate increase has 2 components. A 4% annual increase for the next 4 years, which to support inflationary increases in our operating costs and operating budget, and this new capital maintenance fee that is a more significant increase. The driver for that fee is shifting the approach for funding our capital program. It's not increasing the capital program, it's essentially maintaining it at approximately, combined with our fire flow program, at $20 million a year. It's pretty close to what we've been doing for the last 10 years or so. The shift in how we fund those ongoing maintenance activities is what's resulting in this year-to-year increase in rates that is somewhat notable. We're moving from debt funding to cash funding. The district has taken advantage for the last number of years of, as we all know, historically low interest rates to fund our capital program exclusively with the bond market taking advantage of these very low rates. And we need to transition to cash funding to have a more balanced kind of financial portfolio and not get in a long-term position of getting caught up in too much debt. In the future, the thought is reserving the remaining capacity that we have to take on debt in the bond market through large one-off projects, address emergencies as they arise, or other similarly non-routine capital investments. The capital program that Mike talked about today is bread and butter capital investments, replacements of pipes, recoating of tanks, seismic upgrades, similar to work that's been going on the last 10, last 20 years, and similar to the work that will be going on 10, 20, 30, 50 years in the future. The infrastructure value that we have is somewhere probably north of $2 billion in infrastructure asset, and spending $20 million a year to maintain those is right about 1% of that. So given the size and scope of the system we have, it's a fairly, on the low end, I think, of comparable agencies, the capital program. And it's driven by this shift to cash funding, or some people call it pay-as-you-go funding for the capital program. I did want to note that the district has made efforts to tighten our belt. Over the last 10 years or so, we've reduced how many positions, Charlie? 26 permanent positions in the district, which is over 10% of the workforce. So there has been efforts to try and bring that down. And then lastly, I don't know if I captured all your comments. I might not have, and feel free if you have any remaining questions. Broadly, we're a public agency. We don't have hidden money. Our books are open and available. There's no profit incentive to do that. What you see around this room is where the money goes. The day-to-day work of the operation of the organization. And you are correct in that staff is a sizable component of that. Most recently, the salaries have increased. I can't speak for the general manager, but aside from that, have increased just at an inflationary rate, a cost of living adjustment, which is part of the negotiation process that we have at public agencies. The next card I have is from Emmy Leeds.
great for all that you do. However, I have to go on record and say that I don't believe this belongs in our property tax bill. I think that we lose visibility and that we don't really know, nor do I feel comfortable about how that money is being spent. I do see something here that says that on your literature that the maintenance fee may be used for existing and future debt service payments. So my concern is how do we, what oversight and how do we know how this money is being spent? And also, why isn't this on a tax ballot? Why isn't this something that we would be voting on as a voter?
The first comment of it being on the property tax bill, just to share, the board has decided, based largely on public input, to put the initial 2 years of this fee on the bi-monthly water bill, and then at that point consider migrating into the property tax bill. Part of the reasoning, and I understand, some people question it, part of the reasoning of suggesting initially to put it on the property tax bill is that when we're doing these projects that you saw up here with modern materials and techniques, we expect them to last 75, 100 years, very long-term investments. And the property tax bill goes to the property owner, not a renter or a business tenant that may be there for 2 years, 5 years. And it doesn't, on the property tax bill, it reflects a healthy, strong, vibrant water system, does maintain property values. I do understand, and part of your comments is why the board has decided for at least the next 2 years to put it on the bi-monthly bill. I believe you also asked, why is this not a measure that a city would do going out to voters versus a Proposition 218 process? That's a state constitution process for essential services such as water. We're directed to use the Prop 218 process, which is sending in the protests for folks that may have that. I think you had a third one that I might have missed, or did I cover it?
Oversight.
Oversight, thank you. So the question was regarding how do we know the money is going to be spent the way we're saying it. It's, I want to say, trust us, that's what we do, but it's a fair question. And I want to say that because although being somewhat new to the organization doesn't have hidden money and spends money in an appropriate manner as we tell the public and the board, and there's no hint whatsoever of moving money around or that kind of thing. Nonetheless, it's a fair question because we're talking about a lot of money. We established a capital advisory committee back in November to review this capital maintenance fee, to review the needs in terms of infrastructure, and to provide feedback to the board in terms of the amount of the fee, the nature of the fee. The board has instructed staff to maintain a citizen advisory or oversight group to periodically meet, hear how the money is being spent, see how it's being tracked, and build confidence in the community that the investments are in line with the infrastructure needs of the organization. So we do plan to maintain an active community group going forward. The next card is from Pat Magali.
Well, I've been talking to some of my neighbors about this situation, and they seem to be equally outraged as I am about the drastic increases. And one of the questions that came up was, if they send in these protest letters, who's going to be counting them? And who's going to be verifying the counts?
The response to that question is we have staff that's one staff that opens the letters and another that records them, and then we have our legal staff that helps validate and verify things like, are there any
Will it
duplicates?
be public?
Excuse me?
Will the public be allowed to verify the letter count?
I certainly don't want to say no. My only hesitation is we do have restrictions on public information, sharing that with the public, so I don't exactly know what's possible.
Well, perhaps you could have a third-party independent confirmation of the count.
We could. As you probably know, the bar to overturn the direction in context of the 218 is 50% plus one of your customers. For us, that's somewhere in the 26,000. I don't recall exactly the number. I'd say that would be maybe something to look at if we were anywhere near.
Well, we're probably never going to get there because a lot of people are not even aware of the Prop 218 notice, because it was just a little tiny box in an 8-page brochure. A lot of people didn't
Well,
listen.
you don't take emails either, which is really outdated.
Yeah, so I think the fact that very few people know about it, I think that's one of the problems with this whole increase.
The board was interested and is interested to accept emails. Our legal analysis on that question that came from our board was that does not comport with the current language in 218. I believe by next round there'll be tweaks to the law that would allow that, given it was written probably before the pervasiveness of email, but it's not a option that we see at this point.
I used to live down in Southern California, and I noticed when they send out their Prop 218 notices, they come in a separate pamphlet. They're clearly stated as Prop 18 notices. They're not buried in a 8-page little propaganda brochure. They're actually presented as a pamphlet that explains all their reasoning. And then on the back page, they have a ballot, which people can tear off and send in. I'm just wondering why you guys didn't do that.
I don't know that in this case there's a way to make everyone happy, and I don't mean that in a trite way. What I mean is, I think the history of this organization and other organizations are you're required to send out the rate tables and all of that, and the feedback the industry in California has gotten on that is it just feels overwhelmingly dense. The intent here was to make very clear that this is a Prop 218 notice and have clear language on, pretty simplistically what's required, right? Name, address, signature, and send that in. So I think the intent, and maybe for you or others it didn't hit the mark, the intent was to provide full, clear information on what's being proposed, but also the reasoning and the need organizationally that's driving that request of the ratepayers.
The other concern that we had was the penalty that you put on people that have the larger meters. It seems to be somewhat, well, not somewhat, very unfair, because a lot of houses were built, with meters of different sizes for all kinds of different reasons at the time. For example, I have a 1-inch meter, and it was built, it was constructed that way because of the elevation of my house and my surrounding neighbors. They feel really upset that they're getting penalized because they happen to live in a house with a 1-inch meter. Doesn't seem fair. I mean, it would be the same as if PG&E decided to start penalizing people because their electrical panels were bigger. Makes as much sense rather than what they use.
In Charlie's presentation, but there was a lot of information we rolled through. We tried to share today that issue has come up, that some folks have larger meters for non-consumption reasons. The primary reason is a remodel where fire sprinklers get installed that drive an increase in meter size, but also in some cases pressure requires a larger meter to bring the water up. The board has instructed staff to develop a process whereby if folks have a upsized meter for non-consumption reasons, they would be able to apply for a reduced CMS fee by one step, so you would have a much lower fee if that would apply in your case, based on staff looking at fixture counts and other things that wouldn't by themselves necessitate a 1-inch meter.
This is going to be a new plan? Is this something new you're saying?
Yeah, so this process will roll out in conjunction with the CMF fee. So, and that will be well publicized to our customers.
So it'll be in the bills, so people will be able to.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Yes, sir.
So your response and the rationale that people will be granted some sort of relief for if they have a pipe for non-consumptive reasons still leaves the fact that somebody who has a pipe that's large for consumptive reasons are not just being charged for what they're using, but for just having a bigger pipe. That doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Yeah, so that gets into the question of the appropriateness of using meter size as essentially a surrogate for, and it's not use, but for potential use. And the reasoning is probably, let's just write a fictitious house that may be very large, have large landscaping historically that has 1.5 meter. Now, their consumption, due to lifestyle reasons, kids have moved out, they've put in dry landscaping, they don't use anywhere near the water that would be available with 1.5 meter. We currently have, but we're going to be publicizing it in conjunction with this other program I just discussed for customers to come in and reduce the size of their meter reflective of their actual need. So, and it's a relatively affordable process and a relatively simple process for the customers to go through.
Well, that does sound good, but what you said is that what you're going to do is charge people for not their current use and not grabbing, I guess just grabbing it. You're going to charge them for their potential use. But when they use the water, they're going to get charged for that. So you're going to get the money when they use the water. Now, I don't know what size I have. I don't really know, but just the logic is escaping me.
Yeah, part of the reason the industry, as an industry standard, uses meter sizes throughout the country for these sort of fees is that meter size is defined by the customer. And when a new business comes in, they pay a capacity fee, a connection fee to the system. And that largely in the industry is driven by meter size. And the reasoning the industry does that is we have to believe there's a reason that someone is selecting a 4-inch meter over a 2-inch meter. And if today, maybe their business is starting up, or for whatever reason, they may be using less water, it's a reasonable expectation of the utility that they size their meter at 4 inches because they expect in the future to draw that much from the system. As we invest in infrastructure, we're looking at the future. We aren't looking at use today. We're sizing pipes, tanks, pump stations, and overall water supply based on expected future demand. I appreciate it's not perfect, and most rate structures aren't, but I want you to understand the reasoning behind it as the industry, really an industry standard, looking at potential future demand, largely indicated by the size of the meter the customer selects.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I've been followed also, and what homeowner, be it a custom-built home or a tract home, has a choice of what size they chose? You talk about a business having a choice because the business has a purpose. It's usually a plumber who does this, or the contractor who does it. I've never been asked what size meter do I have, or what size pipe. I've never been asked if I did improvements, what size I want. So I'm trying to understand your explanation of
So,
the desire for potential.
when a home is built, the architect or engineer will look at the likely demand in the system from the number of fixtures, from the nature of the irrigation that may be there, and will, if it's it's part of the building process, and then the contractor may come in on behalf of the homeowner. But the utility doesn't decide whether a home should have 1.5 inches. I mean, we can advise.
Homeowner doesn't either.
Well, a third party on behalf of the homeowner, when a new home is built, does make that decision. And I assure you, because connection fees are largely driven by meter sizes, they want to keep those meters sizes as low as possible, but driven by the expected demand that could arise given the nature of the size of the house, the number of fixtures, and the irrigation system.
That still doesn't address the problem with somebody buying a house that might be 30 years old, and they have no say in, what size the meter is. This house might have been owned by 3 previous owners. Who knows who made that decision 30, 40, 50 years ago? It's not fair to the present owner. It's like changing horses in the middle of a stream, despite what the industry, what you say the industry atmosphere is.
Yeah, Charlie's reminding me, I could say it again, that the homeowners, and we do plan to make it very clear to our customers the path to downsize their meter if they believe it's too large. If someone has a 3,500, 4,000 square foot home, most likely they have a larger meter, right, than a 1,500, 1,800 square foot home. You do see that strong correlation in the nature of the yard, and those sorts of things are correlated, other than fire sprinklers or pressure issues, with the likely demand from the business or the residents.
I don't want to be a dead horse, but I think you ought to consider grandfathering people today, and when people, big pipe changes hands, somebody pulls their own, then maybe they should, be subject to new charge.
We agree with
I mean,
that.
I understand you have a relief valve for people, they're gonna have to go through a process and stuff. I'm just suggesting if I were in a room trying to, brainstorm this thing, I would consider grandfathering folks.
I know, it doesn't make sense.
But using the PG&E analogy, you know that they would never get away with that, trying to, penalize people because their electrical panel was bigger than somebody else's.
Larry Memphis.
Good evening, Larry Minikis. What I'm going to say tonight, staff has heard, several people in the room have heard before, but for the benefit of people that are here for the first time, I am a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee on Infrastructure. I've been involved with MMWD for 27 years as both a citizen advocate and a watch person and a community partner. And I've worked, there's a lot of misunderstanding and mischaracterization out there. With any organization, it's understandable that the public feels a certain level of distrust in government. I mean, we're built that way. But I can tell you from working with staff here over the decades, these are dedicated people, these are dedicated professionals who do not deserve to be beat up in a meeting like this and told that they're overpaid. Because the reason they're receiving the salaries they are is because it's a competitive marketplace. If we're paying under rate, the only thing we're going to get are interns and inexperienced people, or people that have lost their jobs because they should have lost their jobs. And that's going to harm us more than keeping these people. Some of them have been here, many of them have been here for their entire career. And you need to understand that from the public's perspective, that's tremendously to our advantage, because that guarantees us that we're getting the thing that matters most to us, which is good quality water that is always delivered to us. The other thing we need to understand is this entire subject about infrastructure. This is not so much of an expense to the community as it is a reinvestment into the community, and we get several benefits that far outweigh the $13.63 the 5/8 meter people will pay, and the $34 per month, $34.06 or whatever it is, that the 1-inch will pay. Okay, this is Marin. I mean, $13.63 I think is affordable to the majority of Marinites, and to those that aren't, there's programs to help them out. The reason we're here is because out of the last 29 years, we did not raise rates. For 15 of those 29 years, in the 90s, I was standing at the podium saying, this is not the way to run a watershed. You're kicking the can down the road, and our day will come. Our day is actually here, okay? We've got fire knocking at our door right here. I mean, we are ground zero. The slide up there said that we're a tier 3. Tier 3 is extreme fire danger. You need to understand that. We have so much work to do here. If our infrastructure, if we have a fire and the infrastructure fails, we're done. We have to upgrade this. And the thing to understand is we have been subsidized with almost free water for decades. Look at your water bill. Most of us are paying, I forget what mine is, but it's negligible. I don't even look at it when it comes in. There's no reason to. It's so low. We're paying 1 cent or less per gallon. Okay. What has happened is, in the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even back to the 20s, those are the people that paid for this infrastructure, not us. What we should have been doing from the 80s on is that there should have been tacked on 0.2 cents, 0.4 cents per gallon, whatever, so that this municipality could build up the hundreds of millions. It needs $800 million over the next 10 years. We're only funding, you gotta understand, we're only funding around 223 million of the 800 million that's actually needed. Where the other is coming from, no one has answered yet, okay? So we're only talking about 1/3 of the actual need. And when we get to that 10-year period, we will have 51 miles of pipeline replaced other than 300 miles. That's all, 51 miles. But what will happen in 10 years is that there's not going to be 250 miles. There's going to be another, whatever. We're going to be treading water, or worse yet, we're going to be sinking because we're not doing enough to keep up with the needs. Okay, so we have not been paying for this infrastructure. Okay, and we should have been all these years, and we wouldn't be in the situation we're in. The reason, and I went to benefits, and let me finish with this. One of the great benefits we'll get from this is because the insurance industry, and this is what every homeowner has to realize, is looking very closely at every home now, okay? And they are canceling policies, and they're not renewing policies, and people that are trying to sell their homes can't sell their homes because they're uninsured. Okay, so they've got to go to the secondary market where it costs thousands and thousands of dollars. So if you're paying $13 a month, this may save you possibly thousands of dollars in insurance rates because this is what the insurance industry looks at. What is the community doing? You know, we're going to have a fire measure come up, and it's going to be expensive. This is nothing. Wait till you see this fire measure because we need to do so much in this community. We're so far behind. And we are all going to need to support this. Because the other option is, let's not do anything, and guess what's going to happen to us all? Okay, thank you very much.
I did want to just briefly note that I had mentioned we're all senior management staff up here. We are recording this, and we'll be sharing the questions and comments that come up with our board. We do have 2 board members in the audience. I just wanted to note Larry Russell and Armando Quintero that are also hearing and taking in this discussion. Yes, sir.
Did I see during the presentation that there's $1.6 million ascribed for taking care of the watershed during the next year? Is that what I saw?
The slide showed that over the next 2 years, our investment in the watershed will increase by $1.6 million. The capital maintenance fee that's part of the rate increase proposal will contribute $1 million additionally. Not additionally, we'll make up $1 million of that $1.6 million over the next 2 years increase.
And that's on what base?
Do you have the total approximate budget in watershed?
The current watershed budget is about $6.5 million, so it will be increasing to a little over $8 million or close to $8 million a year investment in the watershed.
Okay, so in your judgment, I mean, you guys have evaluated these numbers. In your judgment, is that as aggressive as we should be with that issue?
We have published a draft of our new veg management plan that shows an increased investment in watershed efforts over the next 5 years, amounting to about a $4 million increase over 5 years. So we do, based on the environmental compliance work associated with that veg management plan, once that works through the approval process, we will have the ability to increase that investment because it will have additional environmental impacts on the landscape. So we have to ensure that we're doing it in a mindful and meaningful way.
Well, I understand that, but we all want to still live when it's all done. I taught a nice shadow fellow over here, and he talked about just how far behind we are with that, with trees that sprout and they live for 10 years and they fall, and then they sprout again, and it's all stacked up. And so, I mean, the question is, do you need to front load?
I think it's a fair question, and I would note, I believe the letter may be at the back table, the Community Advisory Committee that I mentioned and Larry who spoke was on it, looked into through a number of meetings into the state of our infrastructure and watershed, and they concluded that this proposed fee was not high enough, that the deficit was such it should be higher. I think it's, as most rate increases are, it's trying to strike a balance between the needs that the organization has and the capacity of the community financially or generally to accept the rate increase. So I think it's a fair question, and could more money be utilized on the watershed? Absolutely. Could more money be prudently utilized in infrastructure? Absolutely. Part of our approach going forward is ongoing prioritization, year-to-year of activities. We're currently have a wildfire task force that's pulling together all of our associated activities and identifying data gaps. It may be that the watershed pulls some money from the capital grade infrastructure to get it going more aggressively. The first thing is we do need to get this plan through the CEQA process, and we expect that to be end of summer, early fall. So I think we're on the right track. We're ahead of many agencies, but absolutely there's a bigger demand out there than this wolf fund.
I know it's not simple, but I get front on your feet. I'd load the fee up for the first 2 years. I know it's not simple, it's not fair to everybody, but I'd put more money in the first 2 or 3 years, for example, and then roll it back to where you think you need to be or something. You save a lot more money by spending it at a fire than you're gonna lose at a fire.
Absolutely.
Bill?
First up, I want to thank you for the PowerPoints that demonstrated all the good things you do, and I very much appreciate having you on and knowing that you're doing good things for the community. However, you're, I'm sure, all aware that the Marin Municipal Water District has garnered a reputation of not being transparent, of basically being accountable to yourselves, and to basically doing what you want to do. Now, I don't place a lot of value on rumors of reputation without any first-hand experience. And this is the first time I've actually seen or met any of you or heard your presentations. And I have to say, in my personal opinion, what I've seen and what I've heard is pretty consistent with that reputation. When someone asks a question about oversight and accountability, and the best answer is trust me. When someone asks a question about how are protest votes counted, and the best answer you come up with is our staff does a good job, and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly. We have no reason to be doing anything but the right thing. It just really doesn't stand up. So I have 3 questions, and I'm more than happy to put myself in the back of the line if there's other people in this large, packed audience tonight that have other questions. I don't want to monopolize. So I'd like to start with my first question. All of these questions have already been asked this evening. I don't think they've been answered very well. So this is actually an opportunity for a second chance to answer questions that have already been asked. My first one is in your PowerPoint presentation. I saw a lot of pie charts. A little bit hard to read them. This is a repetition of the question that was asked about personnel costs. I did not see or hear any mention of cost of personnel, salaries, bonuses, which I've been told independently, nobody ever gets a bonus at Marin Municipal Water District. Did I not hear that?
That's correct.
Pension obligations, other personnel costs, and I have to assume that they are a large percentage of your operating budget. So my question is, what was your thinking process? This being a meeting that, among other things, is dealing with rate increases that are quite controversial. What was your thought process of not a mention, not a piece of pie in the chart, about personnel costs, which are probably at least, if not greater than 50% of your budget, is my guess? That's my question.
Yeah, I think, you're absolutely, I don't know the percent, but I do suspect that it's 50% or more. Someone probably here does. Do you know the percent? Just slightly under 50% of our costs. And that supports a sizable staff of engineers, technicians, scientists, folks
My
that
question
are
is,
working.
what is it there for? My question was, why was there not a mention? Was it an oversight? Was it not important? Are we all seem to be ignorant?
Well, I was trying to answer. The pie chart was designed functionally. So, for example, the segment that shows water treatment plant operations, a very large part of that is staff. The pie chart that shows capital, within that is the engineering staff. So there's quite a number of ways you could slice and dice it. The intent is to be here, to be transparent, and respond to your questions.
I apologize if my question was not clear. My question was not, what does that represent? My question was, what was all of your thought process of not mentioning a word or showing a pie chart that represents cost of personnel? So three opportunities to answer that, because the first two have not answered that question. What were you thinking about not mentioning your cost of personnel as part of your budget?
I understand you would have liked a slide to show that. I was trying to share the thinking that went into why we presented the data as we did. We are absolutely more than willing to show you, if you want to provide your email information, a full breakdown of all personnel and associated costs.
I'm sorry if my question is not clear. What I would have liked to have heard or seen is a transparent conversation about where your personnel costs are, rather than burying it into a pie chart and not mentioning it. It's not a complicated question, and it hasn't been answered. I'm sorry. I have two more questions, but
Okay.
I'm happy to yield the microphone to someone else if there are other questions or other cards. And then I'll come back. There's someone else here. Continue. Second question, which has been asked and not answered, is there has been a very, in my personal opinion, unclear process of protest votes. I have no idea how many votes you've received, how many you've counted, and what kind of oversight process has been established. When people submitted a vote, was there a receipt given? So there's some accounting in both directions. Is there a public oversight in this day and age of questionable voting practices? Has there been, and will there be, a transparent process of how these are all getting counted and what the results will be? Question number 2.
Currently, we have somewhere between 800 and 900 protests. Which is quite a distance from the bar that would overturn the rate increase, 25, 30,000, something like that. So my answer stands, sharing how the process that we're doing internally to take the protests, to track them, and then to have an objective review from our legal staff.
My third question, I apologize, my mouth is dry. I probably need a glass of water, but I don't think I can afford them. There's no mention whatsoever in your presentation, although there was a question that came up, about this, what to me is very confusing, of taking a significant portion of the rate increase and sort of dumping it into the tax bill. And I'm still very confused after being at this meeting this evening of why that was done other than to make the actual numbers of the rate increases seem smaller. Yes, there was a response about how it was with the property forever, but I still don't understand why it was done. To me, it seems like a very confusing and opaque process. Maybe you can help me understand it a little better.
Well, I did note, I believe you heard that the board has directed staff to move to the first 2 years at least to put it on the bi-monthly bill in direct response to comments such as this that we've heard. I can assure you, for what it's worth, that there was no intent to hide things or anything like that. It was, we do have a history of a fee on the property tax bill, so it's not something new to us or the community. We have a fire flow fee on the property tax bill, improving strategic fire flow improvements, and that's been on the property tax bill for some time. I think we just didn't expect these sorts of comments, but in response to those, the board has shifted, at least for the initial years, of putting it on the bi-monthly bills to make it very transparent, because that is a word that is very significant, certainly in the public sector and at the district.
And my last question is, I'm assuming this is all a done deal, regardless of what public meetings take place. Am I misinformed? That these rate increases are going to happen, and that's just the way it's going to be.
I don't, no, that's not accurate. There's a public hearing, a formal public hearing on the proposed rate increase May 28th, and at that time, the board will make the decision on moving forward or not.
So is there anything that ratepayers can do to have this not happen?
I think in part what you're doing here, I think the 218 provides the protest process, and I think the district does have a fairly long history of listening to the community. As most recently as 2 years ago, there was a proposed rate increase with some feedback that got shifted downward at the rate hearing. So I can't predict certainly how that will play out and how the board will necessarily decide.
Thank you.
I could be wrong, but wasn't that fire flow, wasn't that a ballot measure?
That was a ballot measure.
So
Yes.
why isn't this a ballot?
Yeah, really.
That was a unique funding approach for supporting the community. Many, if not most, water agencies do not upgrade pipes just for fire flow, do not replace or add additional fire hydrants. Generally, the water industry looks at fire support as an ancillary benefit of the core mission, and the fire departments or the cities are responsible for hydrants. And if you determine for fire, you need larger pipe size, that's done outside of the water utility business. So this was done in partnership and collaboration with the communities, informed, and it still is, by the fire chiefs of the cities and towns in our service area. So it really is outside, to some extent, of the core business of the water utility of the district.
So can I
Follow-up, isn't that part of what this radio boost is for fire flow improvement?
No, this is, the fire flow improvements is a discrete, separate program.
So, excuse me, so perhaps in 2 years then, we're gonna be faced with, again, having to address not putting, your capital maintenance fees on our property tax bill, is that correct? We will face this again in 2 years, is what you're deferring it? Right now.
For 2 years.
But for 2 years, but then we're back to it again 2 years later, right?
This is Armando Quintero, our board member representing this area.
Hi, my name is Armando. A couple questions, a couple things that come up that I think are really important, and I wasn't here earlier. I'm actually chair of the California Water Commission. I was running a meeting down in Fresno all day and I just got here. A couple things. One of them is you probably heard already, this is the oldest water district in California. The first fire flow bond that was, or measure that was passed by the voters was done 25 years ago. And what happened is, was it 4 or 5 years ago that it came up again? But what happened is everybody committed to an amount on their tax bill in order to improve the pipes that in some cases, excuse me, were almost 100 years old. And what happened is many of our fire hydrants had these smaller pipes, and one of the things that happens with these smaller pipes on the fire hydrants is when you use them, the sort of the shock of the water, and you guys can tell me what goes on here, but the shock of the water hitting the pipe, especially when you turn off the fire hydrant and turn it on, can actually burst that pipe and it becomes useless in the event of fighting the fire. So what happened is over 20 years of work went in with this annual fee that all of us were paying as residents. I've lived in the county since 1983. So what happened is the money wasn't sufficient to finish the job, and we were doing it in tandem with the fire departments. So about 5 years ago, we reissued the bond and it was passed overwhelmingly, and that's just for the fire hydrants. The question that you had about watershed, I'm executive director of the Sierra Nevada Research Institute at the University of California, and we have a lot of researchers that are looking at fire issues in California right now. And I think 4 or 5 years ago, we engaged the UC Davis Watershed Sciences Group, and was it Cal Fire? Yeah, to actually, they're actually in process right now in looking at Mount Tam and doing treatments, or looking at how they can manage the, excuse me, my mouth is dry too, because my water's pretty cheap. So what's happening right now is we're using scientists and professionals to look at the mountain and tell us what is the best way to treat the mountain to protect the integrity of the mountain in terms of being our catch basin for rainwater. And we want to make sure that we should be bringing water for everybody else.
You are speaking now.
Yeah, well, we'll do it for everybody else. No, thank you. So what we need to do is figure out how to do it right and prioritize it, which is the BIFIT, which was mentioned, which we're using that. So we're looking at a lot of information so that we can do this. And the problem we're facing in this county is statewide. I mean, you guys know what happened in Paradise and Santa Rosa and all those other places, and we need to avoid that. There's no question. But we're not alone. I mean, it's been a statewide, frankly, mistake, and we need to correct that. And then there was something else. What was the second question you asked?
The second one was about the voting, the protest vote count.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I'm going to say two things right now. One of them is, because as a board, everything that we do is public, what happens is the way that the 218 is is rolled out is that the staff puts together a 218 package and then presents it to the board in public. So when the public saw it, that was the first time that the board saw it. And so as a board, we reacted to it, and our reaction in many cases was the same as the public's. We said, we questioned whether this should really go on the property tax. And so what we are doing as a board is listening to all of you as we are going down this process of figuring out how do we make this work. And then in terms of the, when you ask the question about, sort of auditing the protest, so that's a good question. I don't know the answer to it, but I think that the board is going to work with the staff to say, how do we do this in a way that makes sense? Because there isn't a process in place right now, because in the past, we literally have had staff that counted it, put it aside. We do get audited as a district every year, and these are one of those things that gets audited when it happens. So I think that it makes sense that we come up with a strategy that is transparent and clear to the public. So anyway, those are just a couple of things that I'm reacting to that I heard. And go ahead.
In the name of transparency, are you going to start recording your board meetings? Make them available to the public?
It's on our agenda for June. Pardon? Well, we are recording them, but we are talking about how to do that.
But it's audio.
Yes, audio.
And then in the case that you do make any changes and put it on the property tax bill, is there a way, like you said with the county, that we can have a ballot on the literature so we can at least have more transparency in that regard, rather than running around trying to get everybody's signature for the protest? I mean, I feel that whole process
This seems really deceitful.
Right, but one of the things about the 218 process is actually it's a part of the Prop 13. When that happened, the 218 was actually a part of that. That's when that was delivered to us by the voters with, frankly, pretty clunky. It's a pretty clunky framework, and it's what all the water utilities have to use. And I think that as a board member, I'm listening very carefully, and with the staff, I think we're going to be looking at how do we do this going forward so it's better, because I do think that, how we allow, the opportunities for people to respond and protest is important and should be, straightforward. But the other thing is that, we clearly, all of our meetings are public, and I do agree that, we need to be posting them more clearly.
Is there any way we can fix this voting process now before these huge increases go into effect? Because I would love more people to be aware of what's going on.
Well, I've seen it in the paper a lot, and my neighbors and friends have talked to me about it. I mean, it's and also I've met with a number of the customers in the district. I'm actually the San Rafael representative, what that's worth.
To second that comment, I'm not at all surprised that there's so few votes, and I very seriously doubt that they are anything close to an accurate representation of people opposed. Just my personal opinion.
Well, again, we didn't invent the process. We're actually following what was handed to all the utilities, and and so how we do that, I agree, it makes sense.
One thing would be have meetings at times where people would show up. Look at the numbers of people who are represented at one of the two meetings you're at.
Mm-hmm.
How many people are 5 o'clock in the afternoon? And I understand that's partly out of respect to your staff, I get it, but you're dealing, the majority of our county works, I think. Who can get to a meeting at 5 o'clock? And if they figure, well, I'll get there maybe by 6:30, what's the point? So it just seems to me that I watched the presentation where I couldn't read half of it. It just doesn't seem that you're doing things to make it easy for us.
All the presentations for the last 6 months are on the website. So all of the presentations.
I came here to learn.
I understand.
I don't want to have to go home and then research it again. That's my point. I don't want to have to go to another meeting. I don't want to have to explain to my friends who couldn't be here tonight. I just don't think that the water district, I don't think putting a little corner piece at the back of the newsletter was really the most effective. I think
The 218 was a separate notice, wasn't it?
We never got it. All we saw was that little blurb that you had on the 8-page.
And when you talk about it was in the paper a lot, a
Well-
lot of people don't read that
But,
paper.
but the 218 notice, is there a copy of that somewhere? Every resident, every customer got the 218 notice.
You're saying there's no protest. Right, but
Yeah. it's-
I don't,
so-
that's a problem I don't know how to solve, because most people don't read stuff that comes from the water district or comes from.
And I
So
think
that's
the
a problem
average,
you can't fix.
the average water bill, I think, is somewhere in the 30, my water bill is $35 a month, you know, and
But shouldn't you include a ballot in the water bill itself, so everybody would get it?
I suppose, I don't.
Or
Wouldn't that
this
make sense?
flyer.
It has to be a special mailing, it cannot be
Why
part
couldn't
of
it,
the water bill.
this flyer?
Again, the 218 regulation actually tells us how we have to do it.
Well, the
It
other
really does.
pamphlets I've seen, 218 regulations, they're a separate pamphlet and they include a ballot. So people.
Our 218 announcement does include a ballot, right?
No,
It doesn't?
It includes instructions how to protest.
And you gotta write your own
Send
letter
it.
to the ballot.
By a certain date.
Well,
I think the fair way to do it is send out a ballot
Yeah.
and make it yes or no.
Yeah.
Then it would be a slam dunk.
Yeah.
I have a clarification. I'm befuddled that you're attaching this to this, the semi-annual water bill instead of the property tax bill for 2 years. Is that correct? You're attaching the cost.
That's not a decision, it's what we're talking about, and I think that and we also,
Theoretically, that's what you're trying to do.
but, well, let me just say that I'm not the board, I'm a member of the board, there's 5 of us, and the decisions that are made are by a majority of the board, so I don't know what's gonna happen there.
The discussion is in regard to the possibility of possibly having this attached to the bi-monthly water bill rather than initially going on to property tax. That's
Right,
the
that's something
discussion.
we're considering, yeah.
But in 2 years, if it does go through, in 2 years, does that mean that amount of money is taken off the biannual water bill and then put on to the property tax?
That's, I mean, the way it's talked about, you know, but that's not a decision, that
It's
is,
been discussed.
right, okay, yeah, I agree.
So if it is decided as a theoretical question, in 2 years, that additional cost will be taken off the semi-annual and you will only see it in the property tax bill.
Yep,
Is that how I'm
Yes.
understanding the possibility of it happening?
that's a discussion, that's right.
So our bill will go down in 2 years theoretically, if it's passed theoretically.
Yeah,
But we have the tiers too, remember, that they were temporary.
I think it's true.
Can I ask another question of the board member before he sits down? I'm confused because at one point the gentleman, Larry, on the committee, mentioned that one of the reasons why we're in this bind is because for so many years we only barely kept up with inflation and our rate increases. But in earlier conversation, I was told that that wasn't the case. So why did the board see some of this? Why did the board plan better for some of this?
Since I've been on the board, we have been doing rate increases because one of the things that happens is when with a utility like this, a lot of the costs, even the maintenance costs, you don't get to choose what you have to invest in, what you have to repair. And so what's happened is in the times when we did not raise rates, we actually went into our reserves. We went into the emergency reserves to do the work that really needed to be done as regular work that's in the past. And so what's happened is now we're in a situation where, and I think this was probably explained, I'm sorry I arrived late, but one of the things about the current proposal is that while we do have a bonding ability, the board is talking right now about using that bonding ability as our emergency reserve. So we'll do that if there's a big cost that happens. And one of the things that we also have talked about as a board is actually putting a new category of cost on what it takes to run water districts. And I have to say, this is happening statewide. And that is that there are costs that we are now looking at that have literally to do with climate change. And one of the examples, did you give the example of PG&E and the power at the water plants? Yeah, one of the things that PG&E has informed us of is that in the future, when there are red flag days, it's very likely that they're gonna shut off power to our water treatment plants. So what the district now has to do and is planning to do is put in, basically these power plants that are in essence the size of a freight engine, a train freight engine. And we're gonna have to have that ready to go in the event of a red flag day. And those are the kinds of costs. That's just one example of the kinds of costs that we are facing in the future that are very different than what we faced in the past. You know, so we've got a changing world underneath our feet and above our heads and the hills that provide us with our water. And there's a tremendous amount of work going on the part of the staff and the folks that we're working with to understand the priorities which we have to pursue to protect the water supply, as well as the forests that provide that for us.
Well, my question comes from a place where I don't mean to be rude, but
That's
I
all right.
think quite a few members of the board have been on the board for quite a few years. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
So I sort of look at, we still have the same people running the ship that's gotten us sort of into the situation. And if decisions weren't made 10 years ago that should have, we didn't want to raise rates because it wouldn't have gone over well now you're raising rates and it's not going over well. So why didn't we properly manage 10 years ago? I'm throwing you know,
Yes,
numbers out.
I think we can talk to each of us about our own perspectives on that. And mine is that, I'll give you a good example. Again, I'm the chair of the California Water Commission. I was just down in a little town called Kerman today. And it was a room full of ranchers. And this is one of those areas where the water supplies, the community water supplies are tainted, as you've heard. These poor communities that are running out of water and also have water that's contaminated. The average water bill in the Central Valley for these tiny communities where people can't drink their water, and they can't bathe with it because the toxins in the water actually burn their skin. Their average water bill is $60 a month. In my community in Marin County, the average water bill is maybe 2/3 that.
But
So
you should
it's,
know that
what's that?
a lot of districts in California have much lower rates than here. Would you be surprised to hear that? Because I collected a bunch of water bills from around Southern California and a couple in Northern California.
Okay, well, the way that rates are established is that how much infrastructure do you have to build and manage in order to serve your population? And if you're looking at LA, that's a very dense population that's very large. So the costs are lower to deliver water to a densely populated community. It's a lot of people. And so that's one of the challenges, or one of the costs of living in a community like this. And again, I've lived in this community since 1983, so I recognize that. And you really have to look at a number of issues when you look at what the water rates are. And if you look in the Bay Area, we're actually in the middle of the water rates for the San Francisco Bay Area. And also, when you look at the number of pumps and pipes and tanks that we have in Marin County, it's the same as East Bay mud.
It's not going to be though. Once you get these increases, you're going to see it. You're going to be right at the top of the chart.
Well,
So what happened that we didn't have, the management didn't foresee this better? I mean, I understand.
Well, actually,
you want to service the debt now, so
no.
you're getting rid of the debt.
Yeah, I don't-
Talked about that before.
one of the things that we did is we had been issuing bonds, and as the management team was saying, we issued bonds when money was pretty cheap. And so we actually were doing, I think, the fiscally right thing for the community and putting that into long-term payback. But what we also were doing some major infrastructure improvements, and one of them is completely rebuilding the water treatment plant in San Geronimo. It's a massive project and extremely expensive, and not being put on the backs of the ratepayers today. That's going to be spread out over the next 30 years.
I guess what I'm saying, again, trying not to be rude.
That's right.
If I know I need a new roof, I don't wait till next year to find the money for the new roof. I try to plan for it. I don't think water treatment plants are things that you don't know are gonna need to be renovated.
I didn't say it was a surprise, and so.
Where's the plan, where's the management plan?
Mike, we have a 10-year plan right now for infrastructure. we always have a 10-year plan for infrastructure, so it's not a surprise. And so I agree with what you're saying. We have to be engaged with the community, and we actually have to be paying the true cost of what it costs to have reliable water that's also resilient. And we're sort of facing reality right now.
I did a lot of research on this subject. I'm totally independent. I get no pay from anyone. And it's a $1 trillion problem across America, and it's facing hundreds, if not thousands, of these small water districts. And what makes it so difficult for us is that we have so many pumps and tanks because of our geography. And the staff pulled together some statistics for us. We have as much infrastructure combined as five similar sized municipalities in the Bay Area. So we have a lot more to take care of, and it's expensive. So we can't really fault the board. This happened across the country. This happened everywhere. It was the same problem. And you're looking at our highways now. It's the same. Look at our bridges. We haven't been investing in infrastructure the way the Japanese have, and the Europeans have, and the Chinese have. And it's an American problem. It's not, you can point your fingers at the board, fair enough, and say,
On American, on the national level, it's a management problem also.
it is.
So that's what I'm saying, it's a management problem. And I'm wondering, we've had the same attitude to do with this for a long time.
Yeah,
The
well,
board has been the same board for a long time.
I've been seeing these meetings for years, and we've had some out and planning, and we wanted to take, just meet the costs of the infrastructure. For example, at the last rate increase, it went up 4%, but the costs that the district are paying are 7%. So when you have 4%, and you compound this, and the actual costs that are going up across the country for infrastructure, 7%, we are about half where we should be, and our costs should be roughly double of what we're paying. We should be paying about 2 cents per gallon.
We do have one more card for you.
Good evening. I'm Amy Willard from the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers. And it seems to me like one of the themes that comes up tonight has to do with process and how that establishes or doesn't establish credibility. So I'd just like to ask a couple of questions about what happens going forward. First of all, we were told that it sounds like the plan as far as oversight for what happens with this capital management fee is to use the Citizens Advisory Committee. And I think that if you're going to do that, you need to give some further thought about what's the composition and what are the expectations and process that go with that. Your current Citizens Advisory Committee, I have no criticism of the individuals, but I don't know how they were chosen and what was the process for choosing them. And once they were chosen, we ended up with a group that isn't necessarily kind of the skill set that I think we need to oversee the money that's going to happen here. So it needs to be augmented or rethought, or a financial oversight committee that includes financial people.
There were financial people on the oversight committee.
So the process that occurred so far was the Citizens Advisory Committee was assembled in December of 2018. That in the first time in the latter part of the month, that was an informational orientation meeting. There were 2 subsequent meetings. There were no minutes. There was no work product. There's no video. All that we get is a 2-page letter basically saying that we need more money. And it may be that that's the right conclusion, but we need a better process that goes with this. So I'm hoping that there will be something in place that helps us ratepayers understand that the money that we're putting into this capital management fee is ring-fenced, that it isn't going to places where it isn't supposed to be, and that it is managed properly. So I think that you need some an augmentation of the financial composition of the committee, and that you need to have one or more people who are specifically taxpayer representatives on the committee. So then I had one other question, so I don't know if you want to answer that first or you want to.
Yeah, well, my memory is going. The, I think the characterization isn't fair. I think it was a very broad-based, very responsive, and financially driven committee with a lot of credentials that brought a lot of thought into the process. That said, going forward, I do expect the committee to expand, and I think it'll follow perhaps something similar of the e-bike committee that we just established that allowed folks to submit interest. I assure you, at the end of the day, any committee selected, the e-bike committee of 10 versus the 50 or so applications, not everyone's happy with the makeup, but it's a fair point. I think we can consider all that.
And I apologize if I failed to recognize any financial expertise that was on the committee, but it'd be super helpful if bios were provided and more of a process. And incidentally, by the way, directors' bios aren't on the website for all of the directors, which I think is unfortunate lapse. The second, at least 2 of your directors are in the same, 2 of your 5 are in the same bios. So, and those are important for us to understand. What are their backgrounds? What are their motivations? So that's helpful. What skills do they bring? The other thing that I wanted to ask about is how exactly was it that we ended up with the capital maintenance fee not being on this year's property tax bill? I've been at most of the meetings so far this year and listened to others on the audio tape. And I noted with great interest at the meeting at which it was decided not to put the capital maintenance fee on this year's, on the 2019-20 property tax bill, that Director Bragman said more than once in that meeting that option was effectively foreclosed. And I took that to mean, and that therefore we need to be considering alternatives or transition or something. I took that to mean that either you had missed the deadline to get it on the property tax bill this year, or that the county had, for other reasons, procedural reasons or whatever, rebuffed that. So is that the case?
No, I believe the date is sometime in mid or late July.
No, the property tax rolls are completed and distributed on July 1. No, not true?
No, I met with the county.
Okay, thank you.
A month or 2 ago, and they laid out that if we wanted to try to do it this year, we had to have our information to them in early to mid-July.
Okay.
And so we could meet that deadline with the county. They were willing to work with us, but we're following direction now to draft the ordinance as the first 2 years on the final bill.
So that you said the deadline would have been early to mid-July?
It's coming.
Okay. And so to whatever extent Director Bragman suggested that wasn't feasible, that was misstated in some way?
It's hard. I need to, maybe we can talk about what specifically was said, and I can help elucidate it.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions or comments? Well, thank you all for staff will be here if there's follow-up questions. If you have specific information you would like us to share with you via email, more details that wasn't covered in the presentation, we can get that. If you'd like a copy of the presentation, please ask us and we'll provide that as well.